I'm going to call this meeting a special work session of City Council to order. Welcome everyone. Thank everyone who's here. Patrick, you look like the only outsider.
I guess that's.
Appreciate you coming, and whoever's online, we welcome you. And as you know, the work session is for council. This evening, we'll discuss issues affecting the city. So we do not vote as well in work sessions. But if you would, please join me for a moment of silence for Reverend Hodges, who passed away today. Thank you. Okay, on our agenda this evening, the only item is fiscal year 2026 draft recommended budget. Turn it over to City Manager Scott Marshall to lead us in this.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public. The draft budget that we will share with you this evening is a culmination of effort from the City Manager's Office, Finance Department, and other city department directors. This is the first public presentation of the staff recommended budget for fiscal year 2026. And we stand ready for questions and are open to feedback for revisions prior to public hearing and first reading on May 13th. What we're going to share with you this evening is a draft of the FY26 consolidated budget, which is made up of our various funds, including the general fund, Parks and Tourism Fund, State Accommodation Fund, Fire Impact Fund, Stormwater Fund, Capital Projects Fund, our TIF 2 Fund, and our ARC Fund. Next slide. The FY26 consolidated budget from all funds totals $73.1 million. It represents a nearly $7.5 million increase from our fiscal year 2025 original budget and a nearly $2 million increase over the fiscal year 2025 revised budget. You might recall from last year's budget presentation that the FY25 original budget was stated as $55.7 million. However, in the process of making the city's budget more easily understandable, the method of presentation has been changed to more transparently present all revenues and expenditures to provide confidence that these two amounts match. Previously, transfers from existing funds were not immediately counted as revenue for the purposes of budget presentation. These funds are now reflected in the FY26 budget as revenue. Alan will break this down a little bit more finitely for you and show you the difference between last year and this year so you can grasp the difference in presentation. Staff is proposing the overall millage rate for this year's budget remain flat at 73.9 mils. The value of a mill this year is $131,885, which represents an increase per mill of $5,432 over FY25's mill rate of $126,453. The increase in the mill rate can be positively correlated to an increase in the number and value of improved properties on the tax rolls. While operating expenses have continued to increase, fortunately, revenue increases have absorbed much of the blow. Specifically, in the general fund, we are projecting a $1.15 million increase in business license revenue and a $370,500 increase in property tax revenue. Our solid waste contract, due to a CPI escalator clause, will increase by $75,000 this year. However, the line item on residents' tax bills will remain flat at $270 because we have absorbed this additional cost within existing village revenues. While a budget of $73 million is a lot for a city this size, nearly $28.5 million of it is in our capital projects fund and consists of previously budgeted and still unspent funds. Much of these funds are in the form of grant dollars. We have also budgeted $100,000 for our housing repair assistance program. The agreement between the city and the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust has been fully ratified, and we are currently working through implementation details together on this program. We are currently winding down a classification and compensation study, and while we don't have the results yet, we do know that the consumer price index increased exactly 3% from January 2024 to January 2025. So instead of waiting on the results of the study, we are requesting a 3% cost of living adjustment across the board for our employees be implemented at the beginning of the fiscal year in July. We're also setting aside the equivalent of a 2% across the board increase for use as needed to implement an action plan in response to the classification and compensation study final report recommendations. Over the last several years, employees have also been subject to a merit increase of up to 2%. Because of the anticipated compensation increases in wake of the study, merit increases this year will be replaced by a one-time merit bonus of up to 2.5%. Our health insurance provider has informed us we can expect a 15% increase to our healthcare coverage for employees. Our broker is working hard to get this number down, but we do not expect it to be less than a 12% increase. 12% increase represents an overall cost increase of $215,379, with a direct impact to the general fund of $185,612. We have absorbed this increase in our operating costs and are not proposing to pass it on to our employees. This is the right thing to do for our employees, and it helps us keep us competitive in the labor market. Next. This slide represents the amounts that are included in this year's budget for strategic partner assistance. The amounts indicated are recommended amounts and are not necessarily reflective in all cases of the amounts that were requested by each organization. You can see that the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation is funded in this draft budget at $42,000. Palmetto Breeze at $28,139, which sounds like an odd amount. But that is the city's share for a matching grant for the Northern Beaufort County Transit Master Plan study. Beaufort Digital Corps is funded for $100,000. The Military Enhancement Committee is funded at $15,000. The Convention and Visitors Bureau is funded at $417,500, and that is driven by the mandated 30% of the projected state accommodations tax revenue. And lastly, the South Carolina Nursing Retention Program Initiative is funded at $5,000. In an effort to avoid surprise and to allow for proper discussion, I think it's important to highlight for you those items and characteristics of the budget that are new or different than what you're accustomed to seeing. Earlier, I briefly explained that the format of the budget this year is improved and represents a truer number representative of revenues and expenses, the only two essential elements of any budget. In the FY26 budget, we are establishing two new positions through the transfer of one empty FTE and the creation of a second FTE. We are converting an empty position in the Community Development Department to a fire inspector position in the fire department to be online in the second half of the year, prorated for 6 months. And we are adding an FTE to create a position in the city manager's office that will combine emergency and risk management. This will provide a full-time emergency manager while filling a significant gap in our risk management program. And this position will be prorated for 9 months. While we routinely compensate employees in the form of vacation and retirement payouts, we have not previously budgeted for these expenses. This year, we have included these expenses in our budget projections. Another new item being proposed this year is an annual tag fee of $23.50 to be imposed on each motor vehicle registered within city limits. Revenues generated from the tag fee will be applied toward the cost of maintaining public streets and rights of way, many of them South Carolina DOT roads for which we receive no revenue from the state. This is expected to generate $231,081 to help offset an expectation of $235,666 in expenses. We would also like to amend the fee schedule to reflect a nominal increase to the rate for off-duty fire and police personnel in support of events. Police rate, we would like to change from $60 to $65 an hour, and for the fire department, we would like to change that rate from $38 to $50 an hour. We've also added a line item to the budget for contingency boat removal and/or disaster mitigation in the amount of $50,000. You'll also note later on in Alan's presentation that we have also designated the release of some of our TIF 2 funds for various capital needs within the TIF 2 district. And lastly, we will include as part and parcel to the fiscal year 2026 budget an unfunded requirements list to identify valid requirements we are not able to fund this year's budget. Before I turn the presentation over to Alan for an in-depth look at the numbers behind our draft staff recommended FY26 budget, I want to briefly go over the next steps in the process after tonight, all of which will provide an opportunity for public engagement. First of all, and with the feedback received from council after this evening's presentation, staff will make any necessary adjustments to the current budget proposed. On April 29th, which is next Tuesday, we will hold a budget workshop to provide department directors an opportunity to engage with council on their individual department budgets. On May 13th, we will hold a public hearing and first reading of the fiscal year 2026 consolidated budget. And on June 10th, we'll have second and final reading to adopt our fiscal year 2026 consolidated budget. Does council have any questions for me at this time before I turn it over to Alan?
We bounce back and discuss some of these individual items later on.
We will, or we can discuss any that you choose to now. This is free flowing.
Okay. I have a little heartburn with the tag fee because it penalizes our less fortunate people in the fact that whether you have a Cadillac or a piece of junk, it's still $22.50 and it hurts them. I was thinking that it might be some other ways to generate some money for the right-of-way maintenance. And I was thinking if we had to shift something and raise anything, it should be maybe relegated to the stormwater fund. Increase that a little bit because that also requires ditch cleaning and maintenance of right-of-way. So that's something I thought about, other than the only other thing's the local option sales tax. That would never pass, at least in the time I know. You could have maybe a little bit of money could possibly be taken from the hospitality or accommodations tax revenue because the right of way serves tourism on the hotels and all that. Cleaner entrance into the city, but I just throw that out as some alternatives to a tag fee.
Well, realizing that this item may be met with some resistance. On the staff side, we thought through a couple of options as well to consider in lieu of the tag fee. And one of them is we can reduce the A-tax grant award amount and shuffle some funding in other areas to provide revenue for that road maintenance. Another option is that we can offset the cost by eliminating the boat removal funds, which is $50,000. And we can reduce our home repair assistance program about $50,000, taking it down to $50,000. That would give us $100,000. And then if we increase the millage by 1 mil, that will yield $131,000, which gives you exactly $231,000, which is the amount you lose by not having tag.
So, yeah, I was thinking about the tag fee also. I was just wondering whether the fee could be value based, which would address Bill's concern, much like the registration fees on cars are now. That might make it fair when you're collecting some money. And my second question is, I'm curious to know whether the anticipated 12% increase in healthcare coverage, would that have not already been addressed somewhat in the 3% cost of living adjustment?
No, that's separate. Those are our costs to our underwriter who is underwriting our insurance, and those are premium costs, not related to the 3% COLA.
Yeah, I too have,
Okay, thanks.
as he's a heartburn, I was gonna use the same term. About the ag fee. Also reduce, I have a little bit of concern about reducing the amount for housing repair. I do not want to see that reduced. We need, if there was a way to do more, which I know there isn't right now, I'd like to see more in there. As far as the ag fee, I hope we can figure another way of doing it because it is a little bit lopsided the way we're doing it, where even though they use the road the same amount, somebody in a Cadillac Escalade paying the same amount as somebody in a 20-year-old Volkswagen. So yeah, I think it's just a lopsided.
I was gonna hold comments till after Alan's presentation, but since the tag fee's been brought up a couple of times, one of the things that I saw some other places put in place was exemptions for the tag fee, and that was based on income. And then there was another exemption that seemed pretty popular, which was based on eco-friendly vehicles. So I do think that there's ways for us to build in exemptions to a tag fee if that's what we wanted to do and still exclude some of the lower income population that may struggle already.
It's eco-friendly, it's an electric car, and it's probably gonna be expensive, so.
Or bike, or no, I'm kidding. But yeah, that was just one of the other more common things that I saw.
I don't think bikes were cats.
Something like that.
Where's the department, what department's historically lit, emergency manager? Or
City manager.
that'll be in your department?
Questions or concerns?
On the health side, is our increase due to our own experience, or is this something that we're spreading across?
It's twofold. Costs are going up for the industry, and we also have a limited number of high dollar claimants on our policy, which for a organization of our size, it only takes a few to really drive our fee. So it's a combination of those two.
Do we have I assume we're having an aging employee. The average age of the employee is aging over time.
We're all getting older every day.
Well, what I mean
I
is,
wonder where it's
you got some younger.
don't think we're
people
getting
coming in to
younger.
help things because they're healthier,
Right,
kind of offset. You have an aging workforce, period.
right.
And no younger people getting in, it's gonna get a lot worse, so you gotta prepare for more than 50%.
Understand, yeah. So in other words, you see it could get worse in the future.
It could be.
Possible.
And
I mean, look at us.
Ashley jumps
Look at
fences,
us.
so.
Yeah, it actually jumps fences.
All right.
She tries to jump.
There was failure involved in that, yes, I do.
But you can never accuse Ashley of being on the fence. Any other questions or concerns from council before Alan gets into the nitty-gritty?
I have some other comments, but I'll save them till after Alan's
You're
presentation.
welcome to do it now or later, whatever you.
I'll save them.
Okay. And at some point, Mayor, I'm assuming we're gonna allow the public.
Absolutely.
Plan.
Our one public, all of them?
There's 7 people online.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As City Manager mentioned, we're using a simplified budget format presentation. This will help make it a little easier to kind of showing revenues at the top, put it all together, and expenditures down the bottom, put it together to show a balanced budget. So with the approved format, the transfers in and release of fund balance is shown under revenues now. And then that transfers out and contribution to fund balance are shown as under expenditures. And so for comparison purposes, the FY 25 adopted budget, which on the next slide, total revenues and expenditures was 65.6 million, which agrees to our fiscal 25 approved budget ordinance altogether. Here is last year's adopted budget in the old format. So you kind of transfers in there at the top and then the release of fund balance, then transfers out, but this kind of makes it a little bit difficult as far as tying out those monies coming in and monies going out. So if we use this new improved format from last year, here's what the format, a little easier to see where it ties back to that $68.6 million amount. So here is our fiscal year 26 recommended budget with the improved format that we have. It's tied back to our 73.1 million. And it's broken down by the various funds. Just want to highlight some of the release of committed fund balance, especially in the general fund. So the 406,590, that includes a $281,590 fire truck payment. And it's kind of a random number, but that came from a 2014 council resolution where we sold a fire truck back in 2014. And we were going to use our proceeds to purchase a new fire truck, and we haven't seen what we have used those proceeds yet. So that's kind of where that number is coming from. That will be a down payment. And this fire truck, you may remember, we already made a $500,000 down payment on it. That has an outstanding balance about 1.1 million. That will be, be arriving this fall. And also we have a use of committed fund balance for a knuckle boom as well. The overall cost is $250,000. We use $125,000 from the general fund from that. committed fund balance to purchase that knuckle boom as included in this recommended budget. And the release of committed fund balance for redevelopment at $375,000, that is for the Duke Street construction project. That currently has about a $1.5 million fund balance as of fiscal year 24. That's where some costs have been higher, and so we want to increase that budget for that project. That includes phase A and phase B. And then finally, that leaves a remaining release of fund balance, kind of unassigned fund balance of $853,000 from the general fund. You'll see kind of the other funds, the release of committed fund balance for capital projects. Those are kind of the capital projects funding that are used for capital projects for these various projects. So most of them are coming from various fund balances to help support these projects. Here it is, consolidated projected revenues by fund. See that the general fund makes up 40% of the projected revenues, with the capital project fund closely in second at 39%, just mostly comprised of capital grants. Now, these aren't new grants that we're receiving. These are more carry forward grants that we've received in the past. And now that these projects are going from engineering and planning to more in the construction phase, we're able to kind of draw down these funds a little bit more. Here's on the expenditure side, a breakdown. See that capital is the largest amount of 43%. That includes the $28.4 million capital project fund is included in that amount, along with some other department capital request items. And then personnel, which is salaries and benefits, make up 27% of the recommended budget. Here's the consolidated revenue budget summary. Let me just go over some of these columns, because you'll see the same format going forward throughout the presentation. So the far left is our fiscal year 24 actual numbers that we received, fiscal year 24. And then the next two columns are fiscal year 25 original and revised budget amounts. And then the next column is our fiscal year 26 recommended budget. That's what we're presenting to you this evening. And then we have our change, and then but the dollar change and a percent change. And those are comparing our fiscal year 26 recommended budget to our fiscal year 25 original budget. We feel that's the best way to compare apples to apples, kind of showing what you originally thought you were going to have at the beginning of last year compared to what we are budgeting now for fiscal year 26. We'll see that format going forward. Overall, the revenues are up, or increased to 7.4 million compared to original budget of fiscal year 25. We'll go into some more details once we get into each fund. The consolidated revenue budget highlights, as the city manager mentioned, millage rate remains flat at 73.9. And then we've experienced some business growth from a strong economy for an anticipated $1.15 million increase in business license revenues in the general fund. Also recommending an annual tag fee for city vehicles of $23.50 per year that will generate estimated $231,801 to offset the city's cost on highway maintenance, street sweeping on state-owned roads within city limits. And then we have the fire truck purchase. The remaining amount is $1.1 million. Planning on financing through a capital lease, $833,000 of that. And then we'll make a down payment of that $281,000 for that. It's important to note that the debt payments for this capital lease won't start until fiscal year 27. So you'll see where we purchase the truck and borrow the money, but then the principal interest payments will start in fiscal year 27. We plan to do it.
10 years.
Yeah, I'm planning on a 10-year capital lease is what that's how we done our previous trucks. Probably that same method going forward. And as Scott mentioned, the off-duty rates, we're recommending an increase from $60 an hour to $65 an hour for police. And then, which I think we changed that a few years ago, and then fire department off-duty rates haven't increased in a while. So we're going from $38 to $50 an hour. That's just to cover the city's personnel costs, like the salaries and the benefit side.
How do those rates compare to other municipalities?
Yeah, I think they're pretty close. I know we did a comparison a couple years ago. We looked at them and then, but we can get a little more information, make sure that we're pretty close, and maybe on the low end. Provide that.
What I'd asked about, when I've met with you before, is there a way of increasing just a little bit more to cover the wear and tear on the equipment that they're using in the cities? Off duty.
Yeah, it'll be what to kind of figure out a way to factor that in. We know what the personnel cost is, but maybe there could be like a equipment surcharge or something that we could do, but I think it will vary by event as well, and
Right.
some of them may not use our equipment quite as much, because they're at the event, not really using patrol cars and things like that, and, but we can. Yes, we can.
And this includes benefits.
Yes, includes benefits as well. That's kind of where we're seeing a lot of we're not charging as much as we should be. Yeah, and we do charge a 5% admin fee on top of these rates as well, just part of the process of billing out.
How do these rates compare to what their normal pay rate would be if they were on regular?
Yeah, they just pay that overtime rate on the police and fire do,
Overtime.
yeah, overtime rate, so time and a half. That's what we're comparing that.
And it varies. Some of our officers are compensated more than that, they may be working on some of them compensated less than that. This is just the standard rate that we put in our fee schedule for, this is what it calls for.
It kind of average out, with that last year's activity, it kind of average out, okay, what charge we do, cover the costs, and that's where those two numbers are. Previous years. Here's a consolidated expenditure budget summary by fund. So all this ties back to our $73.1 million overall amount. Goes into some more detail.
Just a general question.
Yes, sir.
When you make the comparison, why do we not compare it to the revised budget, which I think would probably reflect the more current valid figure of what the actual costs were?
That's why we include all of those, right? Because what, at least the way that I'm accustomed to budgeting is when we're trying to put together this year's budget, I like to compare it with what we put forward for last year's budget, because a lot of the revisions are not necessarily items that you budget for. A lot of the revisions included the ARPA funds that we committed, that we did not necessarily anticipate committing at the beginning of the fiscal year. Some of them may be state earmark money that we're getting that we did not anticipate with the budget. And so for a true comparison of what we're budgeting year to year, I like to compare our original budget last year with what we're proposing this year.
That makes sense. Thanks.
You're welcome.
It's kind of the best apples comparison.
Right. Thank you.
You got change orders along the way, is the way I look at it.
Everything. I like that way.
We covered most of these expenditure highlights, but we'll sure everybody see them again. We have two new positions for the emergency manager and risk manager position within the city manager department. Then that's for 9 months, and then fire inspector, that's for 6 months that we have budget for that. And we have the 3% COLA increase, and then the planning factor of the 2% increase. We're waiting the results of the employee and workforce compensation study, and the merit pool bonus of up to 2.5% for each department. Mentioned about the 12% health insurance premiums absorbed by the city. And we also have employee retention programs as well, included like vacation buyback program. We have tuition assistance. We have an employee wellness program as well. Those are included with that. So overall, our salaries and benefits increased $1.3 million or 7.4%. And for operations, our overall operations is $12.3 million. You'll see some increases within some various funds, some decreases as well. We'll go into that in more detail. And then our capital replacement program is partially funded through the committed fund balance that we have available. And then finally, our debt payments, we have our normal debt payments for our geo bond, revenue bond, and capital leases, and then that new fire truck capital lease payment won't begin until fiscal 27. We'll move to our general fund, which is our main operating account for the city. And the revenues increased 3.2 million. Have the growth in property taxes of $370,000. And then still keeping millage the same. And licenses and permits, mentioned about the $1.15 million increase in business licenses. It's also offset by a $200,000 decrease in building permits. That's because some large developments have already been built or will be built by the time fiscal year 26 rolls around. So those are kind of just one-time revenue. So we decided to kind of reduce that revenue a little bit. So that shows an offset. License and permits of the net 947,000.
Could I ask a question on that? What's the lag time from the time, let's say, of commercial development or one residential development's built? From the time we start collecting?
Yeah, it has to be, once it's being built, it has to be assessed by the Beaver County assessor. And from there, it can take either a year or two just to be put on the property tax bill as well. And so that's
So
kind
a
of the
lot of
process.
development we've seen recently, we don't see it.
Yeah, still another year or so out. This, I checked that, and most of the stuff I've seen right now just has land improvements. They don't have the building improvements for some of our larger developments. But it's kind of, we're still a little bit ways out and seeing that impact on our property taxes. And the charges for services, that includes the residential garbage fee, which will generate about $1.4 million, and we're going to still keep the same fee of $270 a year. The tax bill, even though CPI adjustment is above that amount, but we want to still keep that flat for our residents. And then also the charge for services does include the vehicle tag fee of $231,000 as well. So that shows most of the increase is coming from there. And then you'll see the issuance of capital lease, that's the fire truck, borrowing amount $833,000. Then we go into details on the release of committed fund balance for vehicles and equipment, which is $281,000 for the fire truck payment, $125,000 for the knuckle boom. And then the redevelopment piece of fund balance, $375,000 is for the Duke Street project. Through construction. It's got more of a breakdown for our property taxes. You'll see where our value of the mill has gone up from 126,000 to 131,000. Where we stand right now with property taxes, kind of show that growth. Taxes represent the largest revenue source for the city, about 34.3%. Our assessed value for real property taxes is $112 million, or a 5.3% increase from tax year 2024. And our personal property is estimated about 12.1 million, which is a 3.2% growth. Our vehicle taxable assessed value is 6.8 million, which is actually a decrease of $9.1 billion. So that's just for depreciation for vehicles, and maybe you're not buying quite as much expensive vehicles this time with the economy is. Overall, we have a total assessed value of $131 million. Now, the millage cap for this year is 2.95% based on CPI. We'll get another adjustment once we get information from the state as far as the population growth. But right now, we're using 1.7% of that millage cap for our operating mill to increase it from 58.3 to 59.3, which is an increase of 1 mil. And on the other side of the debt mill, we're decreasing it from 13.6 down to 12.4, decrease of 1 mil. We're still keeping the 2 reserve mills as well. And we'll keep the overall millage rate flat at 73.9. Significant revenues about this license increase and offset by the building permits decrease as well. Also, the charge for services includes the tag fee and issuance of capital lease, $33,000. Here's overall general fund expenditures broken down by the various categories. We have overall is 28.9 million for the general fund expenditures. includes transfers out. And here's a department breakdown. We'll go into this in more detail next week during the special council work session, department directors presentations. I want to just provide you some of the highlights for each department. Non-departmental includes a lot of our strategic economic partnerships that Scott mentioned. It also includes the $100,000 housing assistance program, also includes $45,000 for Burton Fire District and 420, which is for annexations, and then 425,000 for Blaze Island, St. Helena fire agreements that we have in place. Also includes the citywide tuition assistance of $28,500 and $13,500 for the citywide employee wellness program, and $22,000 for legal fees associated with the city's labor attorney. And also you'll see the transfer that the 375,000 is for the Duke Street project as well, the phase A and B. City council, see where that actually has gone down. That's because we're not budgeting $25,000 for a council retreat facilitator in fiscal year 26. We're kind of in a kind of an odd year for next council retreat, so we will have to contract someone for that. And then the city manager's department includes the one new FTE for the emergency and risk management manager for 9 months. The finance department, we have a operating increase is due to a $12,000 procurement software program and also $9,000 for training for our ERP system. Information technology has gone down, and that's because their capital of $150,000 last year was for a environment server upgrade, and that was a one-time expense, but they're not, that's not included in the fiscal 26 budget. Human resources, you'll see their operations has decreased. That's a result of a combination of the $40,000 compensation study that we're going through right now. Fiscal 25 is a one-time expense. And also the $22,000 in legal fees, and the $18,000 employee one program, those got shifted to non-departmental. Those are more citywide initiatives rather than tied directly to HR department. Fiscal court, a slight increase. I think that's because they are now funding a deputy corporate court position for 26. And in development, you see a decrease in salaries and benefits. We budgeted an extra FTE in that department for fiscal 25. So that's why we're moving that FTE from there into the fire department for the fire inspector. And now the community development is fully staffed now. And operations has gone down, but also includes $100,000 for the first half of the city's comprehensive plan. That has come up due. So we're planning on funding $100,000 in fiscal 26, another $100,000 in fiscal 27. And then for police, you'll see where the operations increased. And that's because we're including 6 enterprise replacement patrol vehicles. Right now it's going to be 2 Ford Interceptors and 4 Chevy Tahoes. That includes as to $135,000 increase. And then there's a $97,000 increase for contractual services, which includes $56,000 for lock camera system and then $57,000 for the in-car camera system. And then their capital, we are splitting their capital between, or some of the capital between general fund and parks and tourism fund. The mandatory upgrades for the radios have to be upgraded by 2027. That's $130,000 overall. So we're splitting that $65,000 to the general fund, $65,000 to the parks and tourism fund. And then there's a $26,000 mobile command center travel trailer. And that's going to be split between general fund 13,000 and then 13,000 for the parks and tourism fund. Well, fire department, you'll see the increase for capital not only includes that includes the entire fire truck payment of $1.1 million. There's some other capital requests included in there as well. SCBA for $45,000. $30,000 for station 3 and 4 camera key access. And $12,000, 500 for station 3 parking. And $16,000 for extraction tool. And then in the past, we've also used some of the fire capital to use for ARPA funds as well. Now that that has gone away, you'll see all that being absorbed through the general fund. And then for public works, we have a $75,000 increase for the CPI for capital waste. And then you'll see for capital includes $250,000 for the knuckle booms. We're paying half of that, $125,000 out of our general fund. Some of the highlights for our general fund expenditure summary is salaries increased $706,000 for the 2% compensation study, 3% COLA. Also includes the 2.5% merit bonus. The 2 new positions, and how we're also including for the first time budgeting for vacation, plan retirements for employees leaving the workforce, and the benefits increased $360,000, which most are a good part of that is from the health insurance increase to 4%. That's from the operating increase for the police department for public works. We're planning to use a committed fund balance for capital equipment of $406,000 for the fire truck and for the knuckle boom. Go to the Parks and Tourism Fund. On the revenue side, here you'll see a decrease. Most of that is with our as these projects for the Southside Park and Washington Street Park are under construction phase. We're using less of our Parks and Tourism revenue bonds monies that we have been using for those projects. Here's for local accommodation tax. It's kind of a trend, and trend is starting to come down slightly, but still pretty good compared to before COVID. And then hospitality is still trending upwards. Overall, we're anticipating about a 1.6% growth in combination of hospitality and accommodation tax revenue. Here's our breakdown of the expenditure side for Parks and Tourism Fund. The parks includes $145,000 of facility maintenance, which includes $50,000 for dock landing repair at Picnic Crab, $80,000 for monthly security for cameras at the parks, and $80,000 for Spanish Moss Trail crosswalk thermo, new striping for the city's portion of Spanish Moss Trail. And the capital breakdown is $125,000 is half of the knuckle boom. And the police support, you'll see their capital, that's the half for the radios and half for the mobile command trailer, which overall totals up $78,000. And the marina increase is the $50,000 for our contingency boat removal and disaster mitigation that we have in there for now. And other downtown operations, that includes, part of the increase includes $30,000 for downtown master plan. And our transfers out decreased by $3.1 million as we're using more of those funds for Southside Park and Washington Street Park projects. Next will be the stormwater fund. Keeping the stormwater utility fees the same. Those remain flat. And see where we have less transfers out as our projects are we're using those bond funds more. So now we have we'll use for the Bayard Street drainage project $398,000. I use that project for stormwater bond funds. Fire impact fees. We have an increase from the revenue side. We probably under budget a little bit on the revenue side for impact fees for fiscal year 25. So we got a little more realistic for fiscal year 26 of $200,000. You'll see where there's not really the only expenditures is the contribution to fund balance. We're planning on kind of using the revenues to kind of build up that fire impact fee fund balance fiscal year 26. So our plan for that fund, so we have use those for larger fire department purchases in the future. State combination tax defund. You'll see where we have using some of our fund balance for a couple of projects related to the Arsenal walls, the Arsenal walls rehabilitation project, phase 1 and phase 2, with total $268,000. And our Arsenal windows project is $100,000 for that project. We have ARPA. We're using some of the ARPA funds for our downtown drainage projects for King Street and Port Republic Cartwright Street of $727,000, and then for the Deep Street, increase that a little bit for $625,000. That on the other side of the $375,000 you're seeing in the general fund. So overall, the construction budget for Duke Street is $1 million now. To fund reason our fund balance for some TIP 2 eligible projects for $500,000 for capital for the City Hall parking expansion, $100,000 for a Highway 170/21 intersection camera system, and $150,000 transferred out for the police department building. That's it. $250,000 for South Carolina First Volunteers Park project, and $700,000 for our capital for our City Hall and PD Court roof projects. Well, a high level broken down for salaries by departments. See that breakdown. The overall is $930,000 or 7.2% increase in salaries. And benefits is $439,000 or about 8% increase. Here's a comparison for FTEs where we're showing the one net FTE once we reclassed that extra FTE for community development into the fire department and added the FTE for the risk emergency manager and the city management manager department. Now we have our capital projects plan. Capital projects fund. Kind of let JJ just give a high level introduction to where we are with our each one of those projects, and I'll go into more of the further detail and project by project, some of those numbers.
Council, we not really asking to add any new major projects this year. This is more to maintain the status quo, but you know. We're gonna be going into our 10-year capital planning process this year, and I expect next year's budget process will be a bit more in depth from a capital project standpoint. We're gonna be bringing you priorities and plans for going after grant funding and partner funding for the projects that are identified during that planning process. The only changes that if you have from our strategic planning update is that we lost a bridge grant this last week, 2 weeks ago. From the federal government, that was the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Grant. Current administration has pulled all of those funds, and that was to fund our Pigeon Point Stormwater project, study project. We're still keeping that project as a identified but unfunded priority project because it is the next step in ensuring our stormwater resiliency throughout the entire city after the downtown historic points study. There are some other opportunities that we're in talks with South Carolina Emergency Management about, and Beaufort County about partnering with them for some stormwater studies they are planning to undertake. And when we get further information on that, we'll let council know. We do have a new item in here that Alan will talk about and discuss further when we do the deep dives into the departmental and capital budgets next week. But the police department upfit, y'all know that we have the new gym upstairs. I think all of you have seen that. we want to finish that area out. At the same time, we went ahead and got quotes or started getting quotes to what would it take to finish that entire section of the police department. Police department has shifted some people around, doubled up some offices, and it makes sense right now to, while we're getting it, fixing that section of the gym up, putting the walls, framing that in, to get quotes on upfitting that rest of that hallway that goes around the corner with office space. So that's adequate for the police department. And then also the city hall, police department and court complex roofs. Reaching the estimated end of life in the roofs in these facilities. We have had some ongoing leaks. Scott survived a tile coming down on his, our chairs in his office. Was that Debbie or was that? I think it was Wayne. But those prices continue to go up every year. You'll see, I believe it's around $700,000 that we have funds dedicated to that. But we have our next capital projects work session coming up on May 27th, I believe. And we'll be doing a deep dive update on all of the projects there, our county partners, update council on some of the other projects in the region and ways that we might can coordinate moving forward. But the majority of what you see in the capital projects budget this year is rollover from last year, as we've taken these projects through design and the community engagement, and now we're moving them into construction phases.
I know that with the ARPA money, we've got sort of a timeline on that thing. How soon will these get underway so that we make sure we're gonna meet the deadline?
So the majority of the stormwater projects, the downtown stormwater projects will be getting underway this summer. That's because they have to be completed by next summer. So that's gonna be pretty extensive. Our engineers and capital projects team and our partners at RIA and Skip are confident that we're still within those timelines. Main Street project is currently out to bid. We're still waiting on some final permitting on the other projects, but we do have to have those projects done by next summer. And the other ARPA funded projects completed by December 31st of next year, 2026.
Because the sooner we find out, as it's now, especially disruption and.
So all of these projects, all projects moving forward, as we're building them out internally, it's one of the reasons, again, we didn't want to take on a lot of new projects this year. Part of our project management plans now include a communications plan, so the PIO is a part of capital. And she's working with Raul and his team to identify a communications plan for every project, where we identify all the key stakeholder groups that need to be notified, what frequency we want to notify each of those groups. And then that will also be available on the public portal. You can kind of keep track of that timeline when you expect applications.
Yes, you mentioned we do have some projects that are still funded by grants. So most of our downtown drainage projects, grant funded, and then we also have a CDBG grant for the Spanish Moss Trail extension. That's kind of our grant, and part is also funded in our partnership with Beaufort County. Overall, the capital budget is $28.4 million, includes 15 active capital projects. We have, and most of that's, as JJ mentioned, is more kind of carryover projects from previous years. Here's our funding sources, and most of it is from grants. We have some transfers in from various funds. And we have partnerships with Beaufort County, and then we have on fund balance as well. That makes sense. Revenue side, we'll go into some more detail. So we have the school and the SCIP grant, which goes up over $20 million, and then we have the STAG grant and CDBG grant for some other projects. Here are transfers in. These are various projects that are either supported through bond fund or through fund balance, and they are therefore reflected as transfers in from other funds such as our general fund, stormwater fund, TIF fund, ARPA fund, and parks and tourism fund. So we'll have, we talk about the Duke Street project that's coming from general fund balance. Stormwater, the Bayard Street is coming from stormwater bond funds. And we're using TIF fund balance for the PD police, the building upfit. And also for the City Hall PD court roof project. And for First Voluntary Park, $250,000 to start the construction phase. We know that won't cover it all, but we want a nice budget amount in there fiscal 26 for now. And then the ARPA funds, we're using fund balance for downtown drainage projects. Moving over to the Parks and Tourism Fund, we got Parks and Tourism Revenue Bond Fund has about $36,000 for Washington Street Phase 2 construction. So yeah, that won't cover too much of that. So then we're also using fund balance for Parks and Tourism Fund for the remaining amount of Phase 2 construction. And then there's about $1.5 million left into South remaining from our revenue bond for Southside Park Phase 2. And using the rest of that. And fund balance is going to cover for the ARPA part, we're leaving the platform, kind of more engineering, more Phase 2 engineering for that project. And the Carnegie building interior, using the fund balance for that. We're working on the roof right now, and then the inside needs some work as well. So we're budgeting $200,000 for that. And the state ATEX is for the Arsenal walls rehabilitation, which is Phase 1 and Phase 2. And the Arsenal Windows project is be $100,000 from state ATEX fund balance. A partnership we have with Beaver County for the Spanish Moss Trail extension is $528,000. And then our using fund balance for the Marina fuel tank is $700,000.
Council, I know that project's been in how long before, since before I got here, with everything that happened last year. Forming of the Waterfront Park Advisory Committee. I want to know we have to move forward addressing this issue, but it's kind of become part of a bigger approach to all of the waterfront park and marina, so this will be brought into those discussions.
I'm sure the amount will go up.
Confident that amounts are going up every day on everything.
So the revenue side and the expenditure side, this breaks it down by our various projects. Park construction projects, downtown drainage projects, shows where are with those improvements to the Carnegie buildings and Arsenal walls and windows. Big Street, entire $1 million for construction. That was about $28.4 million. Next couple of slides show more of a breakdown of where the funding is coming from as far as bond funds or some of them from fund balance. And this one shows by the various funds that they are funding these projects for. Here's our unfunded requirements list. Something I'm new to this fiscal 26 budget. I want to show what is unfunded right now. Right now, this is not a prioritized format, but staff will work on prioritizing this in conjunction with our first budget reading on May 13th. And prioritized order can be available for discussion with council during the first budget reading. The city also plans on including an unfunded requirements list for capital projects as well. So JJ mentioned the Pigeon Point drainage project will include that as a unfunded project. I showed that as well. And so that way we have a list of items that are unfunded. We can always draw to if we need to. Everything where we stand for fiscal 26 consolidated budget. Questions or comments you may have?
We have some questions on whoever, but looks out for the is there a hope to get some ground money as well?
It's the goal.
Yes, sir.
It is, and that 250,000, is meant to go toward construction. I realize that won't go very far toward construction, but it will help us match a lot of grants that may require a grant, actually can help us multiply those funds.
Anyone else on council have any questions, comments? Josh, you have any
One of my thoughts here. So going back to the beginning of the slides, 100K for the housing repair assistance program. That is in addition to what we've already set aside for the recently established housing repair program. Okay. While I continue to look through this, Alan, can you go back to the state accommodations and put your finger on the $100,000? I see the $95,000. And I'm guessing that was the original 100,000 for the Twilight Hour initiative. But I also know that we essentially double funded that. So where is the $95,000 coming back to the accommodations as a revenue? Because it shows up there as an expenditure.
Yeah, we're going to make sure for fiscal year 25, before we close out our books to kind of reduce that budget down, pretty much down $95,000. Take it out because we only spent about $5,000. And we're going to, that'll be included in our fiscal year 26 budget. So overall, still $100,000. We're just, this is a little bit longer project than we anticipated. So we're kind of carrying forward that $100,000 across the fiscal year.
Okay,
But
so I was thinking that I'd see the state allocations for this year and then basically almost like a separate line item that showed an additional revenue of the 100,000 or 95,000.
Yeah, not really additional revenue, but more for the tourism grants. I did increase that amount, an additional $100,000 since we kind of double budgeted those amounts. Fiscal year 24 and 25, I added both that $100,000 amount and also their carryover from fiscal year 25, which is about $23,000. That's reflected in that $680,000 line item. So they're receiving more. No way, but in the receiving more than they would originally receive. We didn't have double budgeted for the quality hours.
Okay, so you're saying that there is basically an additional $100,000 in that 680,000 that I see there. That was, I guess, going to be 580,000. Now it's 680,000.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then where I stand right now is I'm thinking the Downtown Twilight Hours initiative was part of what the Tiger team was going to present, right? And that has seemingly been very slow to come back to us. I honestly feel like right now I scratch that $95,000 and perhaps fund our housing repair program out of that. Went back and looked at the language added to the state statute, and it specifically says programs that promote home ownership. And I believe that we could structure the language in our housing repair program to be supportive of home ownership. So I think that we could be creative and potentially fund our housing repair program out of this pot of money. And then maybe we circle back around to funding the Downtown Twilight Hours initiative when the Tiger team is ready to present their data, because I was honestly expecting to see that way before now. But just a thought. And
Councilman, if I could, just for one. So when we put the budget together, we attempt to fund as many of the priorities that council has identified in the strategic plan as possible. And one of them is the Downtown Twilight Hours initiative. So that's why we funded that. I do anticipate in this fiscal year, we will have a report for you. So this budget is for the entire fiscal year. It's not for just immediate plans. And so I do anticipate that we will have an action plan that will result that I'll bring to you all for approval from the Tiger team when they have their final report issued and the recommendations out. So my plea to you would be, let's leave that 95,000 where it is, because that helps you fund that priority, and you also have money set aside for the home repair assistance program, which is another priority you've identified. I would not want to see you leave a priority unfunded if you can help, if that makes sense.
It does, and I appreciate that you're advocating for what we identified as priorities, and I understand that, and I know that this is set aside for the fiscal year. So if in the event that we do get that report back this year, we'd have the money to be able to fund it. I also believe that if we did get that report back this year, then we could fund it next year and it would still be done appropriately. And maybe you would incentivize the report getting back sooner. I don't know, but I'm trying to save money in this budget too. And if we can fund the housing repair program out of this, which I know that we can, this sunsets the provision that we have to fund housing projects and the state accommodations sunsets in 2030.
Yeah.
Right? So we have limited time to do that. And I would like to see us use more than $30,000 for housing in our state accommodations tax fund while the opportunity exists. Because the fact of the matter is if the state comes back and sees that municipalities and localities in general are not using the 15% allotment that they allowed, they're going to take it away, and we are not using it. We did have our needs assessment done for housing. And to me, $30,000 isn't coming close to what we could set aside for housing, and $680,000 is pretty generous for nonprofits lobbying for funds.
I guess I would advocate that if you want to pull additional for housing, you would pull it out of that pot.
And we could do that too, and maybe it frees up $100,000 that's being allocated for the housing repair program elsewhere. But I would really like to see us use some more of this funding for that, because that's what it's there for.
Sunset, though, they're gonna, this,
You're optimistic, and I'm optimistic too, but I think the reality is if we're not using it, they're gonna say, well, that's because they don't need it. And so we would be better using those funds and giving ourselves more of an opportunity to see them extend it, opposed to just hoping that they do. And then what, if we haven't used it and they do extend it, what good is it to us anyway? They can extend it for 10 more years. If we're not using it, it doesn't matter. It's not helping us. Alan, do you know off top? And I know, Scott, I brought this up to you and I completely understand your position on it. I do feel compelled to say it anyway. Do you know off top what a 3% cost of living does to the budget? How much does that cost us to do a 3% COLA?
General fund is probably around $1,000 ballpark.
$600,000. And we have 200 employees, right? 180 employees. So, Chief Ogden, hate to put you on the spot. What is your starting salary for a firefighter?
Well, right now, the base salary is $36,000 for firefighter recruit. Then there's scheduled overtime built in that, depending on their work schedule. So
Okay.
if you include that, holiday pay gets around $45,000.
Okay, 45,000 with holiday pay. Chief Price, what's your starting salary?
$51,460.
Okay. Perfect. 51.45. So I think that the compensation study that we get back is going to show that we have underpaid essential employees. And so just listening to the finance meeting in the county yesterday, it's very consistent across the board, not just for our county, but nationwide, that our essential employees are not paid enough to be able to live, and especially in an area where cost of living is higher. To me, that is the priority, is finding a way to increase those base salaries. I understand that the budget is done to reflect a 3% cost of living across the board. Me personally, just making the comment, I do favor a flat raise. And if in this case you have $600,000 and 200 employees, you could essentially give every employee a $3,000 raise. And that's gonna mean a whole lot more to somebody that makes $45,000, because now with a 3% cost of living, the guys and girls that get paid the least are actually gonna get the smallest raise. They're gonna get maybe $1,000 bump in their pay. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think that that's the best way to do that. I would try to get those base salaries up to make us more competitive, because $35,000, $45,000, that's not gonna get somebody and that's not gonna hold them. They're gonna look for a better opportunity. We're gonna pay for their training and they're gonna go somewhere else that pays more. So I would like to see us do that. But just throwing that out there. The fire inspector and emergency manager. I think that Scott and I feel like, maybe I'm wrong here, I feel like that emergency manager, risk manager is coming from some of where we felt like we could do better with some of these previous storms, and maybe having somebody that's dedicated to emergency or risk management, that would be of value to us, and I agree. I'd like to see us, if we haven't already, try to get the community involved. And I know I've had several people express interest to me, and I think that we've kind of hit on it some, where we have we know members in the community that are willing to step up and help us in those emergency situations. We know we have several members in the community that have assets, whether it's large vehicles, tractors, dump trucks, whatever it is, and they're willing to allow us to utilize those assets or be a part of our cleanup process. And I would like to see us try to seek volunteers to help offset what may be a deficiency in or room for improvement in our risk management, opposed to a new FTE. Maybe that's been weighed and this is a better option, but I would like to see us seek volunteers for that. With the fire inspector, moving that over from community development, I understand that. I would ask Chief, though, based on the load that we're trying to split between the fire inspector and maybe a new assistant fire inspector, is there the opportunity for us to, say, give a current employee a $20,000 raise to help share that load? I think it would be cheaper for us if we could find somebody that could or be interested in, that already works for the fire department, to maybe make a little bit more, but have more responsibility and share some of the fire inspections. Have you looked at that route, or?
We're actually doing that now because the workload is too high. We have a full-time firefighter that comes off shift, works overtime to offset the workload of the fire marshal's office. We also pulled one of our 9 part-timers in from the floor to be a part-time fire inspector, just because the workload is so high and we still can't keep up. And this is also in anticipation of everything that's being built now, coming on our books for routine inspections. So unlike building codes, when you construct it when it's being built, you're kind of done with it after it's CO'd. We inherit it after that, and we go back all the time for fire watches, routine inspections, sprinklers, fire alarms, all the stuff that goes along with apartment buildings and everything you see being built in our community. So yes, we are doing that now because the workload is there, but I don't think we can continue to do that and manage the workload that we have in the fire marshal's office.
So, okay, so I guess we're kind of doing that now, but even if we were to pay, I don't know what this new position for a fire inspector would pay. I would imagine that it would be more than $60,000. So would it be financially more advantageous for us to pay 3 individuals who currently work there an additional $20,000 a year to work, got 3 shifts, so 1 for each shift, to help share that load? Would that help, or do you feel like it still would be too much of a burden for even 4 people to split that load, and this is still justified?
Right.
What's the cost currently that you're using with the overtime and the part-time person?
Did you ever do that evaluation? We haven't really calculated it, but it depends on how much that person is able to work. And that's what I understand what you're saying about the multiple people, but the two concerns I have with that is one, sometimes in some weeks, they just can't work extra, you know, depending on how busy they are, depending on what training they have, they can't consistently work the overtime hours we may need them. And two, when it's not the same person, it's hard to go back and follow up with some of these inspections and some of these developments when it's 4 different people going, looking at it, maybe there are 4 different ways. Then when it's one person that's consistently on top of projects and managing them appropriately. That's the 2 concerns I have with doing it that way versus the offset. And we can get the numbers for you and see where we are now and what we're spending now versus what it would cost for us to fund the position as it's budgeted for.
I don't know how hard that would be, and I don't want to put more on your plate when I know you got a lot. I would appreciate seeing what the difference would be to better understand if there was more value in providing vertical opportunities for people who are already employed with us, opposed to creating a new position entirely. So I think that would definitely be helpful for me.
Councilman, if I could address the risk management.
Yep.
Concern. I don't think we have a common understanding of what risk management is. Risk management in the municipal setting is a position that's dedicated toward, as it seems, mitigating risk throughout the organization. It also is a position that deals as a go-between with the insurance company to handle claims that the city takes on. They work with our workers' comp representative, for example, to try to reduce any type of repetitive injuries that are occurring, which ultimately can save us money on our insurance rates. So it's a position dedicated to that. It's not something that members of the community could help with.
So that's the same for your emergency manager?
Combined.
No, it's a combined position. It's one position that does both. So it's an emergency manager / risk manager.
So, Councilman Sweaty, I believe what you're talking about is a lot like a community emergency response team, a certain, which I'm all for. You know, my background, I worked with certain teams in multiple communities and counties. The issue that talking to Scott, identifying this position as a priority within the city manager's office was, I think that's a great idea, but we still need somebody to organize that and to manage that report too. And right now, emergency management is done as a collateral or secondary duty for the department employees. And he's stretched pretty thin. I stay on him quite a bit about continuity of operations, internal business continuity, trying to get out ahead of things, not just hurricane planning. There's all sorts of things that can happen, hazardous materials, to any sort of all hazards incident. And I think what you're proposing is definitely something we'd love to have in this community. I think it would fall very easily under that umbrella of what's proposed. There is somebody who's going to build out that program. Even if you take the traditional community emergency response team framework, putting that together is a lot. I've done it for a couple of counties, and it's pretty time consuming. And I know David doesn't have the time on his plate right now because I'm already stretching him thin with day-to-day requests. Scott and I don't have that. I'd love to get, I would love to be out of the office doing something like that, but we just don't have the time in our day to do that. So I think it's a great proposal, and I'd love to see it happen, but I think this position is someone who could do that and get something like that off the ground for us.
This position also would be a force multiplier for Alan of the finance department, because right now we have someone who is really labeled as accounts payable technician, who is handling all the insurance claims. Well, it's making sure that all of our vehicles are insured and that our bills are paid for the insurance and that all the claims are sent to IRF on time and those types of things, which is really not his primary duty, but I think it probably consumes half, if not more, than his workload right now. And so that workload would be absorbed by this position as well, which would free that person up to help Alan out a little bit more, because Alan's a little short staffed as well. So.
And if they're doing their job, they can probably save we would probably pay for their salary. Because a lot of, especially the workers' comp, it's experience rated. So however good we, whether we do well or bad, we either subsidize or we get subsidized. they're doing their job, we get subsidized by the cities in front of them.
And I think that sounds good. Is there a metric in place to gauge that, to see if the return on the investment, the new position is paying dividends?
Yeah, we could definitely establish a KPI that would measure the success of that position.
Yeah, and you'll see it on your workers' comp, because they do it.
Probably take a year to be able to see it, but
What's that?
take a year or two to be able to see it probably, but you'd see it.
It's usually about 48 months. To see the full benefits of the risk management program. But yes, that's KPIs or something we're working on internally. That identifies a priority for this, 2-year strategic plan, to roll out for all of our departments. And, this would be a department within the city manager's office.
For a city of this size, as the city manager, I get a little nervous when we're hurricane prone and we don't have a full-time dedicated emergency manager. We've done well so far, but we can do better.
All right, and I'll ask this because I don't know. How does this play into what the county is doing on their end? And is there a way for us to collaborate with Port Royal and the county on this role? Or is this something that you feel like the city needs to have independent of what everybody else is doing?
I feel like the city needs to have it independent of what everyone else is doing. It is a position that provides some key linkage between us and the county emergency management function. And that's something that we have now, kind of, as the deputy city manager pointed out, digging is stretched pretty thin right now. And emergency management is not his primary gig. I need that to be someone's primary duties and focus, and thinking about that all the time. Because as JJ mentioned, it's not just hurricanes. What keeps me up most at night really are possibilities of a mass casualty. And we need operation plans for that. We need operation plans for hazmat spills. We need ops plans in place to know exactly what we're doing. We need to have tabletop exercises regularly so that when those events do happen, we're not caught flat-footed and we know exactly what we're going to do. So,
And that's
we don't have that right now.
That's what you plan to bring through this role.
Yes.
Got it. The tag fee, we had talked about maybe implementing some kind of exemptions for lower income. Just as a more common
Right.
example of, what I've been able to find others do. I still have a common word here today has been heartburn. I have heartburn of implementing new taxes, especially if we're going to keep the millage as it is. And if we did implement one and have exemptions in there, then I don't know that I would want the funding to be maintaining state-owned roads. I'm already concerned about using the TIF2 funds for capital needs. I understand the need exists, but I do feel like our transportation concerns are priority, not just amongst this council, but in the community as well. That is the most common concern that is brought up, is transportation concerns. And so I think that if I had my way, the TIF2 funds would be spent on transportation needs. I know that maybe if we do the parking for City Hall, there's the thought that the shuttle is gonna run from here to downtown. I think that sounds better than what it actually will be. Maybe it turns out to be great. I don't know, but I don't know there's gonna be a whole lot of people that park here, get on a shuttle and go downtown. So I would prefer to see these funds spent on really bettering our transportation needs as they are. And I have expressed that concern. But if we did implement a tag fee, I would want the funding to be specifically for our transportation needs, not necessarily maintaining state-owned roads.
TIF2 funds are not going toward maintaining state-owned road. That's.
No, I know. Yeah, that's the tag, that'd be the tag fee. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If we implemented a new fee, because we already, I brought my vehicle tax bill, but we have $60 for, vehicles in the city now that we get. So, and that's also for maintenance. And then my understanding of the franchise fees that we have with the utility companies are for right-of-way maintenance as well. So we have other funding streams in place for road maintenance. And I'm not saying there's not a need for, street sweeping and cleaning the roads. I just think that we have other priorities when it comes to transportation opposed to spending our taxpayer dollars on maintaining state-owned roads when I think we have other areas of transportation that are more important, I know, to me, but also to members in the community. The I did not see Pigeon Point drainage study on the unfunded priorities. JJ, I know you had brought that up as one of our unfunded priorities.
We got final notification that we for sure lost funding after this presentation had been put together, so it'll be added.
I see, I got you. Okay.
Presentation, that's why I want to bring it up again.
Okay,
And you're gonna address it at the capital.
Yes, sir. We'll go into some more detail about options at the capital projects.
Yes.
I didn't realize that the anticipation was, and Councilman Mitchell, you've been, more involved with the First Volunteers Park. I did not know that we were anticipating spending this much money on that park, and I guess I don't fully understand, the priority of spending, again, $250,000 of TIF money. And that's not even going to cover the entirety of that park. I didn't realize that we were doing that much work to the park. Maybe, could you elaborate a little bit on what that?
I think that figure was there since last year when we had our strategic plan.
No, I thought we put $100,000 there, and now I'm looking at 250, and I don't know if that's in addition to the 100,000 or if that's.
We put 100,000 in this current year's fiscal budget for the purposes of design. And we're in that process now. We're evaluating vendor proposals for design of the park. And then we will bring a contract to you within the next couple of months, most likely, to award a contract for design. And so that $100,000 is for design of the park. This $250,000 is separate and additional from the 100,000. The 250,000 is meant to help fund part of the construction costs. Once we get a design in place and we do that and we figure out what the design is going to be, and then we will bid for contract for construction. And that 250 is to go toward construction of the park. Won't cover the entire construction. But.
And I guess I just don't know I was thinking like a walking trail, preserve the view shed and some signage, but I don't know. It sounds like this park is gonna be pretty expensive now.
Well, I suspect it's gonna be a lot more expensive than 250,000, but as Scott said, we have to get things in place so we can have something to take to get grants to show what we're planning. And that 250,000 is to get those things in place. We've always intended at the park, and we've always known that we probably get pushback trying to fund it if we, from city funds. That was never our intention. But no, the plan is to try to get funds. That could be increasingly hard given that, where we are with the state of the national government and pushing back and canceling funds already. But we're very optimistic, and folks I've talked to feel that there'll be enough interest in that park to fund it beyond the 250,000 using grants, but it's out there.
And we are married to that being priority, like the funding of this park, whether it's the $250,000 here or grant funding, that is a priority need for us.
I think it's
Two
part of it.
things. One, there's no reason for it not to be, when we have the means to do it. And two, I believe council's already identified it as a prioritized capital project.
Prioritized capital project when we originally allocated $100,000 to it. But again, I go back to the fact that we have a lot of transportation needs and this doesn't do anything for that. And we're using, yes, we have the means available, but is it the best use of those funds? And
Well, I guess that-
And that all depends on your priorities.
right, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And that's what you all need to decide.
Yeah,
what your
my-
priorities are. So,
For me, priority is, when it comes to the tip two is transportation. We are, in this budget,
What are
we're,
you proposing with the transportation for tip funds?
I don't know, but we do have a lot of priority needs, and I don't think that couching the parallel road is addressing those priority needs. It's just saying now that is harder to achieve than what it was yesterday, and so we're going to abandon that idea. But I don't know that the most efficient thing for us to do is to spend the money on our own capital needs when it's not going to help us address the transportation issues that do exist. I'm not an engineer enough to say exactly what those needs are, but I don't think that all of the plans that we had previous that identify those transportation issues and all of the new development that we have that's pressuring our transportation infrastructure reduce the need anymore. I think it only adds to the need that exists, and this isn't addressing those needs.
Well, I take a more long-term strategic look at this $250,000 investment. You know, Beaufort is a historic city. Everything we talk about in Beaufort is history, because Beaufort has a lot of history. That's the first South Carolina volunteer park. If you look at it from a long-term strategic perspective, you ask, what will it bring to Beaufort in terms of increasing the significance of Beaufort's history? Sure, we could take the $250,000 and put it on transportation, and it'll make a dent. But I don't think that would be the best way to go. I think we can do this part in a very, very small investment of $250,000 when you look at the overall long-range perspective of what the park brings to the city. So, you know, I will always vote to try to keep the money where it is. We're not looking at funding the entire park using taxpayers' money. But if we don't use the $250,000, we're not even gonna get it off the ground. So that's my thoughts.
Where are we with the Northern Beaufort County Transportation Plan? Is that?
Well, you should ask, we're gonna update on that Thursday night, we'll have a joint, Port Royal City of Beaufort Council meeting.
Mike, you doing
Brian
it?
Sullivan, the director of Palmetto
Yeah,
Bridge.
Brian's doing it.
Oh, yes, you'll do it?
Brian.
Okay, good. Yeah, because that'll answer some of your questions too, Josh.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, the
Maybe
transit-
it will, but-
The transit study is different than, that's what I was trying to get from you, what you were looking at you're looking at more of the connectivity and the conduit of the parallel road and the roadways along in the tip.
right. That, and I think we have,
I
other-
needed to understand where you were going with transportation.
we have, I think, you know, a numerous amount of transportation concerns that in my mind, we should be working on as priority, because that is quality of life for today and tomorrow. And I understand that Beaufort is a historic place, and I am in favor of supporting historic efforts. I just don't want us to be so lopsided on focusing on the history that we don't properly plan for our future. And that's what I'm trying to counter on some of these expenditures that I question the need for them right now, when I know for sure that we have transportation needs that exist. I don't want those to fall off the radar.
Yeah, I agree with that, Josh. Does anyone in this room really think the parallel road is ever gonna come to fruition? Seriously.
I think it's dead.
I think it's
been
dead. I think
for a
it's
long
dead
time.
if in conversation we kill it, but I don't think that means that we don't have transportation concerns that need to be addressed along boundaries.
And I agree, I totally agree with that, but it's not gonna be the parallel road. Let's just face that fact, and it's never gonna be the parallel road. I think there are other options, but when it comes to transportation and solving that transportation need, it's not gonna be something that the city can solve by itself. Because we could build a nice trolley system and the folks in the county will be running around and using it. That's gonna have to be a joint effort, it's gonna have to be larger than the city. when it comes to the first South Carolina park, it's a open land trust county and city effort, but the city has the lead on it. So I think that we should go ahead with that. It's relatively small money to get the program off the ground so that we can get folks to see what we're trying to do, so we can get grants and hopefully finish the rest of the project. In terms of transportation, I think it's long overdue that we should have some sort of trolley system. But I don't think that's something that the city's gonna solve by itself.
I agree. I don't think it's something that the city's gonna solve by itself, but I do think that the primary burden does lie with the city to help provide a solution, and it does not seem like we have a solution to those transportation concerns. Yes, there was at one time the parallel road, which was floated with several alternative options to be that solution or that potential solution. Maybe that was a good idea, maybe it wasn't a good idea, but the reality is we don't have a solution to our transportation concerns. And I do think that it's on us to at least put enough attention on those issues to try to get the solution. And then if we have to go out and find partnerships or additional funding, then we can do that. But I guess my whole entire point is I don't want those needs to be in the backseat for
This is the last thing I'll say about this. I don't disagree with anything you said on that, but I don't think killing or not funding, getting seed money to get the first South Carolina park up and flying is, is the answer.
My understanding though, on this Northern Beaufort County Transportation Plan, they were gonna look at transit, bus and transit to include trolley.
The transit study.
Yeah, transit study for the whole area, so they're gonna be looking at, and you have to take that in the regional northern. And the county and the city are obviously gonna have to be law as well.
I don't, I don't think that's what Josh's point is. It's not specific to just our systems or.
Correct, I mean, they're talking about busing, people into work, because that alleviates the traffic on the road. Because people having to come from outside and work in town. Most of them come in. All we gotta do is drive to work in the morning, rush hour, you can see it.
Yeah, well, and just driving to Bluffton this morning from the Saloka, like I see exactly what I don't want to experience here. And, we already have things that we can't pull back on, but I think that being very thoughtful in what our future is what we need to do. And one of the main concerns there is transportation. So we've talked about that. I think we've expressed our individual positions on it. That's just my thought. Again, I did not think that the park was gonna be that expensive. I don't know exactly what's being done there. If $250,000 isn't gonna do it, we put the $100,000 for the plan. I don't know how much it will end up taking, but if this goes through the way that it is, we've spent half of what we have available in the tip 2 funds. And we'll have a new roof and a park, but we'll have to figure out something else for our transportation needs. The unfunded requirements list, a lot of vehicles. I again wonder if there's a better way to purchase vehicles. We've just looking back at the 6 leased vehicles, it looks like we've got 6 leased vehicles for 22,000 each.
Yeah, so that too is some of the newer vehicles from the last fiscal year, like we purchased 15 vehicles. We just prorated it for 6 months. Now we're seeing the entire year of activity now. This year 26, that's part of the increase as well, those new vehicles. Rather than having to use the entire year.
Yeah.
And
And again, I know that replacing vehicles is necessary. I would like to see us not spend $80,000 on vehicles. And I would like to see more of a focus on getting our personnel to a base pay at least that I feel like is competitive. We'll know more about how that looks whenever we get the compensation study back, but that is my big concern with fire department, police department is making sure that personnel are compensated justly and we remain competitive to provide those essential services. So that's,
They gotta be good runners. Because they wanna have a car to ride in.
I don't know that, no, I don't say that, but do we need an $80,000 vehicle? Or does a $50,000 vehicle suffice, or a $40,000 vehicle? I guess that's my point is, I'm not sure that we need to spend that much on
This
vehicles.
is the vehicle or the highway? Maybe the chief can address some of this.
It says patrol Chevy Tahoe with equipment, so I think that it's both. But I'm just wanting to make sure that we're putting focus on personnel and the salaries and not the assets, because if you don't have an officer to be in the patrol car, then it's of no value. And I know that this is not an issue that is unique to us. This is more nationwide, but I think we really need to take a hard look, which I think the compensation study is a way to do that, to figure out how we get those.
I think this has come up before, during my tenure on council, and one of the things was that because patrolmen spend so much time in their vehicle, the quality of the vehicle is like living in your house.
It's a recruitment
Right.
retention.
Yeah,
Well, it's
so
not just a.
maybe the chief can talk to this a bit.
I absolutely agree with that. I'm telling you, officers aren't just looking for pay, they're looking for to be fully equipped. There are a limited number of manufacturers that actually make police vehicles now. So police vehicles have special suspensions in them and engines to survive the rigor of a 12.25-hour shift. So they're made with special equipment, which is one of the reasons why they cost so much. Also, that includes cages, lightings, radios, camera, all the accoutrements that go inside, computer that go inside the vehicle as well. So they are expensive, but our choices are very limited into what to buy for patrol rated vehicles.
We did explore all the different options, and one of the things we heard from officers here that I was dealing with from officers in North Carolina is they didn't like the Explorers, the Ford Interceptor, storage, let room for them, putting their in the back, very limited room. The Tahoe seemed to be what both our department as well as other departments that I've worked with recent years preferred, because the vehicle and the costs were about the same.
Right, so, but I just want to make sure that we're, and I know this is at a department level, but that we're balancing the expense of the car versus the expense of the person, because I understand that they do want, to be comfortable and they're in the vehicles a lot and they do need all the other equipment that goes with it. But I'd venture to say that if it came down to somebody making more or somebody having a nicer vehicle, then there is a right balance to strike. You don't want them to be underpaid and have a nice vehicle, because then they're gonna go elsewhere. You have to find somebody else to be in that vehicle. So I think that, and again, back to the compensation study, maybe this tells us a little bit more about where we are, but I don't want to get so far ahead without understanding what we may need to do to adjust those salaries and get people up to where they need to be.
And I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I'm gonna backtrack a little bit on fiscal responsibility. This council, in not so far distance past, kicked the can down the road with reference to maintenance of our assets, buildings. We have a number of city assets that have not been maintained and have not been brought up to the standards that they should be. And 10 years ago, we recognized through an analysis in Johnson Controls how poorly we had maintained our buildings and our structures and our assets. So I caution you not to be pound foolish, penny wise over pound foolish, because that costs us 10 times the amount of money to get them brought back up. And we still have a fire station and a public works that are not where they should be or should have been. So kicking the can down the road with reference to maintaining our buildings is not a good response. because it will cost us a great deal more in the future to try to bring them back. So a constant maintenance of those assets is far more important, which we recognized 10 years ago when we weren't doing it. So just don't be over, zealous to cut those areas, because those things do need to be done, and they don't get cheaper, to do them in 5 more years, or 7 years, or 10 years. Right.
That's not negating the need for improving transportation options and transportation infrastructure. I'm sure it exists, absolutely. But when staff saw an opportunity to use some of these SIP2 funds for very much needed capital expenses like groups on the complex there, that gave us an opportunity to replace those items without putting the burden on the taxpayer again. In other words, we didn't have to raise taxes. We didn't have to ask them for additional money to do this. This is money that we have, that we're able to spend on those items. So it's almost mutually exclusive of the need to spend it on transportation infrastructure. $4 million in the TIF2 fund is going to be a drop in the bucket toward any transportation infrastructure solution from this day forward to alleviate our congestion out front. So continuing to let those funds sit when we can use them for other things without raising taxpayer burden, staff saw as a win. And so just give me some rationale as to why staff is recommending this. So that said, ultimately it's the decision of council and your will with regard to how you want to prioritize your use of funds.
Yeah, and again, my concern is those issues don't ever get easier, and at some point, we are going to have to address them. And so while on one hand, we don't want to neglect the maintenance needs that we have, we also don't want to neglect the transportation needs that we have. And I'm just trying to make sure that we strike the right balance of doing both and not just spending money because it's there. Which I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but that's the point of why I'm saying what I'm saying, because I want to make sure that we don't.
Short of another transportation referendum that's successful, or local option sales tax, or some other additional form of revenue that would give us money to place toward transportation infrastructure. The only solution I would see was we sit on the TIF2 funds, and then we establish some additional millage and put it directly toward a fund to fund future transportation infrastructure projects. But again, that's putting an additional burden on the taxpayer right away. They're gonna have to pay for it sometime, in some way. It's just a matter of how they do it, and in the interim, what can we pay for that we can avoid raising their taxes to fund. So
Right, and I guess,
it's a
so
complex part.
I understand $4 million in a transportation project is a drop in the bucket. But again, I go back to, I think that our transportation needs in the city, or at least identifying a solution to those transportation needs, that burden does fall off. I don't want to sit back and wait on the county to get a sales tax pushed through or whatever for us to understand what the solution is. And my concern is that on some of these things, we don't know what the solution is. And the previously identified potential solutions were couching. So us doing that is not negating the need that exists, but what we're doing is we're removing the option that once was considered a good idea as something that's dead. So, okay, if that's the case, if it's dead, then we need to figure out what the solution is. And I think that some of those funds could potentially help us find the solution. And then if in the event that a sales tax gets passed, we don't have to then start trying to figure it out. We're like, hey, we're ready right now. We know what the solution is based on our needs. We have the plan done. We just need the additional funding to make it happen. And I think we would be more prepared in that moment if we had the solution identified. And right now, in many ways for transportation, we don't.
Yeah, I think even if this budget is passed with those TIF2 funds committed, that leaves us how much in the TIF2 fund balance, Alan?
Over $2 million.
A little over $2 million, which will continue to accumulate interest, which can go toward a study area. So there still is a substantial amount of money in the TIF2 fund to fund exactly what you're talking about.
And just a comment about that with the money in the tip too, but I know we've got the equipment, JJ would probably be the better one that can answer this one. Part of the problem on 21, Boundary Street is the coordination of the lights. Is there any additional equipment we could get that might better coordinate them? So
That's being done right now.
Yeah, probably not to speak to that, or,
that's the number one complaint I hear.
that's in process right now. They don't give me an update on that.
Not only that,
So we partnered with the county and we are in the process of trying to get the finalized engineering up and running. The controllers, they're Intellect controllers that are in there now are not functioning with the way they should, where it is coordination for each light going down Boundary. We are going back to a common controller that we have in every other light that we have throughout the city. We're gonna update the engineerings, the time of day. So during different times of day, it may give longer greens to the main thoroughfares. When it goes to the end of the day at nighttime, it may give, extended green until somebody trips the side streets or other things. We are also looking into better detection for like the McDonald's intersection. You saw the 100,000 that was in there for some camera systems, to go up there as well. We've identified this need and we're not only just trying to worry about Boundary Street. This engineering study does all of Rebo all the way to Mossy Oaks Road. And then we're also working with the county to try to do 170 corridor from McDonald's all the way to the Broad River Bridge. So we are trying to look in the future and try to better the signals and as well as safety, trying to figure out if there's needs for, new signals, more improvement. We are building a lot of new subdivisions and there are more cars on the road. So we are trying to plan and work with Beaufort County and our partner Port Royal as well to try to make sure that we are planning for the future.
Yeah, one of the greatest. Thank you.
Any other comments, council? Hearing none, I'm gonna open it up to the public. Patrick, you got something? What's your name and address and all that for the record?
Patrick Canning, 212 Burroughs Ave, Beaufort City. Before I get started, one question for Scott. Could you give me an example of the off-duty police, the $65 proposal? What's an instance of where that might be used at, in the fire department as well?
Yeah, that would be, when people have events in our public spaces and our parks, for example. Part of the contract requires them to have a certain level of police presence or fire presence on standby, and so it's part and parcel of those contracts, part of the piece.
Right, understood, thank you. Okay, so fiscal year 24, established on May 9th, 2023, consolidated recommended budget was 57.6 million. Comprises 30.5 million in general budget and a 27.1 million capital project. FY24 revised budget, 63.2 million, 10% above recommended budget. Value of mill increased from 108,764 to 128,731 based on anticipated value. This was explained as a revenue neutral change in combination with rollback of 4.3 mills. Budget included a 5% COLA wage increase, 2% merit increase, 5% healthcare benefit increase. There was also a budget amendment for an additional 5% increase that went into effect mid-January 2023. Fiscal year 25 established April 23, 2024. Consolidated budget 55.7 million, comprises 34.1 million general budget and 21.6 million capital projects. FY25 revised budget 71.2 million, 28% above recommended budget. Value of mill increased from 122,069 to 126,453, 3.5% increase. This budget included a 3% COLA wage increase, 2% merit increase, and 3% healthcare benefit increase. Based on property tax revenue of 38%. Fiscal year 26, as of today, consolidated budget 73.1 million, 39 million general budget, and 28.4 capital projects. This results in an overall increase of 31% over the previous recommendations for fiscal 2025. Value of mill increased from 126,453 to 131,885, 4.3% increase. Budget includes a 3% COLA wage increase, 2.5% one-time merit increase, 2% pay increase based on study results, 12% healthcare benefit increase. Property tax revenue represents 39.9%. Combined increase in city salaries from 2022 was 5%, 23, 7%, 24, 5%, 25, 7.5%, totaling 24.5% in pay increases, coupled with 20% healthcare increases. I assure you that the private sector is seeing nothing close to these kinds of salary increases. For the past several years, I've seen a continued effort by the city manager to increase revenue streams through a wide variety of taxes, fees, business licensing. But let's not forget, though we may not be tourists, we bear the impacts of these same levies everywhere we go. If we're going to have an honest conversation, let's try focusing on efficiency instead of spending increases year after year. The taxpayers are bearing the expenses of these decisions for years to come. Some of you may consider yourselves fiscal conservatives. I'd like to see some of that mindset applied with this budget. Press the city manager to go back and streamline his proposal for department spending increases. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a clip that I forgot to make, and I actually printed out something to give to you, Scott. This is in regards to the $50,000 mitigation for the vessel removal.
Yes.
So I think that is a wise decision and undeniably a need for us. We've had abandoned vessels there for a while. We know now that that's going to cost money, and so setting aside funds, I think, is just good planning. But I would like to see that coupled with a and maybe you guys are already working on this, but strengthening the language in our ordinance to more align with state code, but also to provide us some other alternatives opposed to just pulling them out and crushing them. So an example of what that could look like and some of the concerns in our current ordinance, we have a 7-day abandonment period, but the state requires 45 days. So I think we need to go back and look at that. It doesn't do us any good to have a 7-day abandonment period if the state statute doesn't allow for that. The ordinance's immediate disposal mandate bypasses state provisions for handling proceeds or allowing owner recovery, potentially exposing us to legal challenges. And doesn't necessarily reference coordination with agencies like DNR and DHEC. And I know that we do that, but I think that capturing it in our ordinance would be of value. I did print out Hilton Head's most recent update to their ordinance, which was in May of 24. And I think that you'll see in some of the language, if you haven't looked at it already, how our ordinance could be strengthened and aligned with state statute better if we were to perhaps take some of what they implemented and put it into ours. So
Thank you.
there you go.
Scott, I can address that. Been working with the city attorney. He had actually looked at incorporating most of what Hilton Head had done. I don't know where he's at on that. But we actually met with DNR 3 weeks ago. At the marina. Well, we also met last Monday, but this was when we met with them on site at the marina. And they have given us some model language from other jurisdictions to look at and have offered to provide some technical guidance, dive into that, but I fully expect that one of the many ordinance updates we bring forward to the council this year.
Where's the bill on that in the legislature that Chip Campson put in about $3 whatever? Yeah.
I don't remember that being talked about in the summary last week. We do have our monthly earnings call next Friday. So
It's like, no, I mean, and to me, if we have to spend 50,000 to get these boats over here, we ought to make a story out of it, use that to get a statement. Look, this is a coastal problem and we gotta do something about it. It shouldn't be fair for the taxpayer to have.
Thank you.
Sounds like you guys are already.
Right, we've been working on it for a while. Part of the limiting factor is the state law with regard to vessels. You talk to any DNR officer, they'll tell you the same.
It looks like what Hilton Head did was mirror the 45 days, but then implement within their ordinances a notification process. And then once that notification procedure has been met and the 45 days has passed, they have a financial penalty that goes along with it, but they're also able to, in that moment, go, and my understanding of it is anyway, in that moment, remove the boat. So if you had a plan in place and you had some funding aside for it, really shouldn't be a reason for why the boats are stranded there for longer than 2 months.
I believe most, if not all, of their ordinance replicates what's already in the state code. So,
Theirs,
yes.
yes, theirs aligns with it very well. Ours is
It
pretty weak.
duplicates it.
Yes, yes.
So the state code would already apply here, and that's what DNR officers use to, for their notification process and their timelines before they can declare a boat abandoned. If you recall, we had the boat at our day dock for quite some time, and we had to wait for them to complete that process to declare that boat abandoned before they take it away.
But isn't it that they could do it, or we could notify, we could have our own notification process, and so long as the notification requirement is met, whether it's us that does it or DNR, then it wouldn't matter. So we wouldn't necessarily have to wait for them to do it if we had that factored into our ordinance as well.
That's true. That's absolutely true, but I see that as a duplicative capability. In other
Well, the
words,
issue-
we already have that capability to say, and they work well with us with these boats, despite how long they've been out there. Right now, they have titles to all but one of the boats that are abandoned, and soon 2 of those boats should disappear this weekend, and the additional ones should disappear at the end of the night.
Now, what I was starting to say, part of the issue was the retitling of vessels in order to be able to legally move them, because there were insurance claims on several of the vessels as well. Right. And so 45 days or not, if you have an outstanding insurance claim and you're fighting an insurance company, that will result in a legal action.
Here's the mercy of the insurance.
Are you? I don't know. Yeah. That seems kind of silly, because if the insurance company just drags their feet, then the vessel could just stay there for a long period of time.
Well, I think it has to be
Seems like that could be
From
challenged.
their point of what they have to do. We went in and condemned an abandoned, created an abandoned boat while they were still trying to get their insurance claims to retrieve the boat. You don't think that would be a legal action?
Do vehicles sit on the side of the road until the insurance is complete, or they get pictures and move on, get it off the road?
They tow.
Right. They
But
get
that's not the
pictures.
same, that's not the same licensure either. I mean, that's not the same abandonment.
Right,
They get towed to an impound thing.
In our case, we're.
but that's the thing is we don't tow them
We're gonna
to,
pay
we don't
for
tow
the
them to an
impound.
impound. But if you had that built in, then it would be an option. If you got it off the water and it went to somewhere where it was stored and you either auctioned it off or you recycled or whatever you did with it, and that's what Hilton Head captures in theirs, is they give themselves more flexibility for removal opposed to just crushing and discarding. Now, I don't know how well that's worked for them. I haven't talked to anybody in Hilton Head, but just looking at the language that they put into the ordinance, it seems like that's the base they were trying to cover.
No, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I'm sure the ordinance was well crafted from the standpoint of how it would function in the process of what the state statutes say. I just wonder what the funding source is. Because if you talk about funding sources and the use of money, that's a costly thing for our taxpayers to pay for removing somebody's private boat.
It's also a jurisdictional issue. We don't have jurisdiction in the water or below the watermark line, so the boat's trapped there, then we have no jurisdiction of that boat whatsoever. The state, however, does. DNR still has jurisdiction.
For Howard Hilton had.
That I don't know. It's in this one.
So my understanding from talking to DNR is you can engage in jurisdiction, but once you do that, you've got that jurisdiction. You're expected to do everything there, policing and regulatory matters.
The state always says that. It's like, if you wanna do something on your state roads, you get to take a bet.
But maritime law is a little different, that's. Detail laws.
I think all of those are matters for the legal team to work out, but I'm just trying to throw that out there because I think there's room for improvement in the language that we have and what we could have. And while we're working with setting aside money aside, for that purpose, I'd like to see our language strengthened. That's a lot of room for. Yep, good point.
Well, if you got anything else for this? Well, I know we have a meeting next week.
Nobody.
There's no down, there's no.
We have our,
No, it's not.
We have our department
They're
budget
popped in now,
presentation
they're
next
all
week.
on now.
we'll probably go back and watch this particular session after, so notes along the way, but you sure we didn't miss anything, I'll go back and watch this again. And then, we'll take all the comments under advisement for first reading. Share that with you well ahead of time, of course. When we go to first reading, I believe that's the point where we'll have the budget online in the electronic budget book. Where it will be easy to go in and isolate different funds and break the data down finitely if you want to, so. And that's open to anybody, so. Right. Want to be as transparent as possible about our budget process.
Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn this meeting. We'll meet again